Tell me about The Last Laugh.
Well, The Last Laugh, the basic idea was to get 10 stand-up comics together with 10 what we used to call PWAs and see if we could focus on them instead of ourselves for a change. Big challenge for stand-up comics. And we wanted to find people who had always wanted to be comedians but were out of time. Because this was a time period where you died. When you were told that you had AIDS, you had about
6 months to a year.
6 months to a year.
Is what they told me. And PWA at that time in 1988 meant person with AIDS.
Right, exactly. And so I thought that if we could focus on people who were out of time, who had a dream just like we had dreams, that perhaps there would be some way of satisfying that dream sort of in a quick, short period of time with a lot of focus and energy. So the 10 comedians were to listen to the PWAs, find out who they were, and write jokes about the context of their lives, and then support them in performance, which would then be filmed and aired, we had hoped, nationally, which it was.
So I don't know how the producer did it, but she got a bank of rooms at the Seacliff Inn. We all checked in for the weekend. We had seminars at the Cessnon House at Cabrillo College, and we did this crash course on how to be stand-up comics. And then on Sunday night, we took the sunroom at the Coconut Grove, and we, 10 comics and 10 people with AIDS, did this giant comedy show. And we rented tuxes and went all out and invited whoever we wanted. My mother came. She was very impressed. I don't know if she was impressed with the comedy, but she thought I looked really good.
Well, you did.
I did. I looked really good. And the whole weekend was absolutely amazing.
It actually ended up 9 PWAs because the woman who was interested got much too sick to come to the weekend. It's pretty heartbreaking.
Can you tell me about the stand-ups?
The stand-up comics. Okay, well, we had someone who is rather well known in San Francisco area, political commentator Will Durst was one of the comics. And then his wife, Debbie Durst, and her improv partner, Mike, Deb and Mike, they also took on, we paired people up one-on-one, pretty much. We had Steve Bluestein, who is just classic comic, wonderful comedy writer. He came up from Los Angeles, and the magnificent Carrie Snow, who made quite a name for herself up here doing houses and bathhouses and stuff, and then just hit the ground running in Los Angeles and was a big mainstay at the Comedy Store in LA.
She was my comic.
Yeah, she was. And then Blake Clark, who some people might remember from the Adam Sandler movie, The Waterboy, being the one who speaks that patois. He's known as the Vietnam vet comic, and he flew up for it. Oh gosh.
And has since had quite a career in television.
And movies.
Why do you think that these stand-up comedians were willing to do this project?
That's something I cannot answer other than at the time I was pretty prominent at the Comedy Store. I was on most nights, main room and the original room, and we all sort of knew each other and trusted each other. And if someone said, hey, I have something very beneficial, here, this is going to be a really good thing to do, it's a film, and we're going to get it on national TV, well, that's a draw for anyone who is self-centered. And I think that was the most profound lesson, is we went to do something sort of altruistic, and we ended up being the ones who were gifted.
Right, and it was daring. I mean, this was '88. I mean, people were just beginning to like drop like flies, and it was not a humorous topic. And here we were doing a comedy show about AIDS, and nothing could be more peculiar. So I don't think it was that hard to find 10 comedians who were willing to step into this very awkward situation and give it their all. I mean, and they gave it their all. It was amazing.
We ended up losing one of the comedians to AIDS about a year and a half later. He had no idea he was positive. His name was Jimmy Samuels. He was really funny.
Yeah, there's the finished product was eventually sold to PBS, and you can see it on YouTube.
Yeah, when you say sold, I'm going to put quotes around that because they never paid us the money. And someone lost their house because of that. And someone lost their house because of that.
Yeah. And it wasn't picked up by PBS, the corporation. It was picked up by individual PBS stations. And I got a call, when it became available, I got a call like 3 days later from a friend of mine in Chicago. And we had lost contact years before. And I said, how did you know I was in Santa Cruz? And he said, I saw you on TV. And I thought, man, that actually works. So it did get pretty wide distribution, but not quite the way PBS does it. But it's an interesting show. It's a little dated now, but it was amazing for its time.
AIDS is not a funny topic. What motivated you or inspired you, Karin, to come up with this idea?
That's the function of comedy. So there's been a lot of research about comedy and the effect that it has. Most prominently, there's a sociologist, her name was Mary Douglas, and she talked about how societies form in a circle, what is safe and what is unsafe. And it is always the comedian or the artist who challenges what is safety. And that makes the society progress. It expands, or at a time like right now, it contracts into more conservative spaces. And so this is why jesters were some of the first killed at court, is because when you approach a topic with comedy, you are challenging the paradigm. The other position that one can take about why comedy is if you want something to change so badly that you're going to address it with something that might contain a little bit of shock, right? And it's been shown that if you address something with shock and surprise, the revulsion of the person viewing or the relief they experience from the catharsis of finally being able to laugh has been scientifically shown to create more societal change than any attempt to address something with seriousness. When Spielberg shows us the train and the little girl with the red coat, it's moving. And people walk out of his film and they say, oh, that was so sad about the Holocaust, and then they're done. They say, I'm a good person, I've cried over a tragedy, and they go on their merry way. But if you confront someone with the burden of AIDS, the task of surviving those 6 months to 1 year to perhaps 18 months, the day in, the day out, the pervasive suffering, the diminishing of yourself piece by piece, you can't walk away from that and pat yourself on the back. You examine yourself. I laughed. I laughed. This person told these jokes and laughed to raise his T-cell numbers. That's why they did it, is to try to prolong their life looking for a cure. To try to prolong their life looking for a cure. That's why they did this.
So comedy is political to you.
Rephrase that, please.
So would you say that comedy is a tool of politics, a tool of political change?
Comedy is a key tool of political change usually inadvertently, by someone taking themselves much too seriously, who makes a fool of themselves.
Yeah, that's real obvious right now. Joe Kinney, at the time, was the director of the Santa Cruz AIDS Project. And I was first a client because I had AIDS. But secondly, I did a lot of volunteer work because there were never enough volunteers because it was a struggling organization. And when I started volunteering, there was only one paid employee. And by the time Joe Kinney she was the second director. There was maybe a staff of 5 or 6. And I was the only really involved person who actually had AIDS. So she called me and told me about Karin. And she said, Karin has a very strange request. Would you meet with her? And she said she's a stand-up comic from LA and she just moved up there and she wants to do some sort of fundraiser for Santa Cruz AIDS Project. So it involves AIDS and it involves comedy. And I thought, yeah, that's right up my alley. Because I've always had a warped sense of humor and I've always made fun of my situation, whatever it happened to be, long before there was AIDS. I mean, I would make fun of when I would get the clap. And so I said, yeah, I would meet with her. And so she came to the Victorian where I lived, and we sat on the front stoop and just talked about all the possibilities. And I just fell in love with her. I thought, wow, she actually has some ideas that stretch my imagination. I can imagine what it would be like with 9 other people all coming up with their own ideas. Because I half of my act was already in my head. I mean, just things that I pulled with my family, because my family was, you know, they were modeling, and I was always trying to make light of it to get them to not take everything so seriously. And so, you know, my act was half written. My Aunt Bertha was always she was so supportive and so worrisome, and so she started coming up. She lived in Sunnyvale, I lived in San Francisco when I first tested positive. And plus she was nosy, and the first thing she would do is go into my refrigerator and start looking through my refrigerator. And we had gone camping recently and forgot mayonnaise, so I bought one of those little tiny half-pint things of mayo, and she looked at it, and she knows that, you know, I'm a Costco person and I buy half gallons of mayonnaise. And she looked at that and she said, "What's this?" And I said, "Oh, Bertha, I'm not willing to invest in quarts and pints anymore." And she looked at me so sad. She said, "Bertha, I only buy ripe bananas." And she got really sad. I said, "Bertha, if I could, I would buy calendars just 1 month at a time." And she just got me going. The sadder she looked, the more maudlin the comment I would make. And I thought, as soon as I met Karin, I thought, I'm going to use those lines in stand-up. And so she definitely inspired me to be as demented as I could about the whole subject. And I knew that's exactly what she was looking for, so it got worse from there.
Oh my gosh.
Why did the people with AIDS want to do the last laugh?
Well, I think everybody had their own reason. I think I explained my reason. I mean, I was a bit of a ham anyway, plus I wanted people to lighten up I mean, yes, it was very serious, and I really did believe my doctors who said, you know, I mean, they gave me the standard line, which was, you have between 6 months and 2 years to live. I mean, that's after testing positive twice. And, you know, after testing once, I went into it having a cocaine problem. And after I tested positive the first time, I started doing more cocaine because I thought, I'm not going to take this straight. I am going to be as high as I can when I die. And then when I tested the second time, and I had this moment with Dr. Leff, everything changed. Everything changed. His attitude about my attitude just made something click. And I wanted to make the most of whatever I had left. And part of that was not just my responsibility to myself, but my responsibility to other people. And that's when the whole purpose of my volunteering changed. And so when this came along, I got on the bandwagon to try and get people to dig deep and to look for that thing that would make them see things, see the lighter side of it, and everybody did, and you know, that's why the comedians were just so amazing, because once they started helping people write their act, they got totally focused on that, and I think most of the comedians put the fact that everyone was terminal to the back of their head and focus on writing comedy, and it just became something else, and it was a joy to watch. I mean, when I wasn't working with Carrie on my own stuff, watching other people work on their stuff was great. And if you get a chance to watch the video, you know, you'll get to see different comedians working with different PWAs, and they each have their own style, and you can see the PWAs really getting into it. Like, can I try this? Can I try that? How about this? Does this joke work? And it's and everybody has their own purpose. Some of them always wanted to do stand-up. Some of them always wanted to be on stage. Some of them wanted to show their family.
Yeah.
Some of them wanted to get even with their family. I mean, you know, not all the reasons were pure. Some of them were hostile. So.
There was also a study that came out at that time from Stanford University where they were proving that T cells increased for people who embraced humor. And that was being sort of touted, that conversation. So people who were on the fence about it became very much invested in doing it and happy about it.
Tell me about the night of the actual performance. What was that like?
God, it was so exciting. Well, Karin became the cheerleader. She was there not only for the person that she was teaching, but she was there for everybody. It was like, first of all, it was a precursor for me sort of getting back into theater, which I hadn't done since high school. So it was very much like being in a play. I mean, with everybody backstage, you know, helping everybody to look as good as they could, straightening each other's collars, fixing each other's hair. I mean, it was, everyone became a theater person suddenly.
Yes.
I mean, it was, I hadn't seen a transformation like that in years. And it was just, it was such a source of pride, not just for what any single person accomplished, but for what we as a group accomplished. It was.
I had done television in LA, right? I did stand-up comedy. I had done stand-up comedy in LA. And I had been on sets, professional sets for different shows and things, and it's always very precise, and it's like clockwork, and everyone has their job, and you don't mess around. Once you're at that level, you come, you do exactly what you're asked, you go. And this was almost like the revolution on the set. It was, yeah, we're not doing that. We're gonna come in here, we're gonna love each other. We're gonna, here, have some candy. We got some flowers over here. You look hot. Let me do this to you. There, oh, you're looking good. It would belong to the performers, right? We have these camera operators. I mean, when has a camera operator ever volunteered their time? Can I just say that? A professional camera operator who is a union person, right? Right now they are fighting for their rights. They are out there right now fighting for their rights through their union, right? But this night, everybody took their agendas, their very important agendas, because I'm very pro-union, and they just said, we're going to put that issue over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our talent and our energy and our art, and we are going to fight AIDS with everything that we have right now.
Yeah, I would take over right now, but she's making me cry too, so.
You fight with what you have, right?
It was everybody on the same page. It was remarkable. It was remarkable. That unity just sort of spread, you know, and not just among the talent and the crew and the band, but the front row and then the back row and then. You know, it was, I mean.
People came in formal wear. We were 100 folks past capacity, thank you, fire department. You couldn't squeeze another body in there, and they were in formal attire. We did this to AIDS.
Yeah.
What do you think you accomplished that night?
What did we accomplish?
What did you accomplish?
We put down a marker that nobody else ever put down. And that's that this is not something that, it was like creating a fire break in a runaway fire. You know, it was a marker that said, this is where we stand. We're not helpless, we're not lost, we're not overwhelmed. You know, this is who we are. And, you know, our fates may be in question, but we're standing here solid. And it's true that all of the PWAs, except me, did eventually pass on. Why I'm still here, I have no idea. I have hunches, and certainly I think laughter is one of them, because I'm the first to make fun of anything. Well, Karin might be the first to make fun of me. But I'm second. I take all her jokes about me and I apply them to myself. If they're good.
I think we gave 9 people, we put kind of a button, we add a little button to their life, that this is the thing that I did in a culturally recognized way that is some measure of success. We got to have some of the bric-a-brac of success, and we worked hard and we did this thing, we made a mark, we said what we had to say. So they got that. But the big gift was to the comedians, I think. where we learned what really matters in one night. And I remember after the taping and everybody had gone home and whatever, and everybody who is a comic and on the production crew, we sat kind of crumpled in a room at the inn. And I want to tell you that for that particular inn to allow us in there, this was a time when people did not want to hug somebody with AIDS. They didn't want to touch them. People who were passing away in different cities were put in a hefty bag and left in alleys. Medical people did not want to touch people with AIDS.
Restaurants. We had all our meals in their restaurant. Nobody said anything.
We were crumpled in this room together in a pile, sitting around, and it looked like the thing, like maybe after a party that has gone on for a week, and everybody's sort of sitting there completely like, what just happened, right? And we're in this circle, and we're just kind of shaking our heads, gobsmacked, completely wiped out. And we were sharing the fact that the secret was like the end of a corny fairy tale where the fairy godmother comes out and says, the secret is it was impossible. And that's what we felt like in that room, is that we just experienced the impossible. We're never going to be the same, ever.
And the gift was to a lot more than the comedians. I mean, the Santa Cruz AIDS Project to people who knew about the AIDS movement, Santa Cruz AIDS Project stood out as a beacon to progressive thinking. I mean, I know people who were involved in San Francisco and in New York and in Houston and all over the United States. And they all know who the Santa Cruz AIDS Project is. And mainly because they put this thing together that took place in 1988, and you can still see it on YouTube. And it's remarkable.
What kind of impact do you think The Last Laugh had on this community?
On this community?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it all depends on whether you were in the audience or not. If you were in the audience, people still talk about it. If you weren't in the audience and you know about it, you wish you were there. It's one of those things that got a little bit of buzz beforehand, enough so that it was filled to the rafters, and then the talk afterwards made it the one thing that thousands of people wish they could have seen. And thank God somebody got a hold of the copy that went out to the PBS affiliates and posted it, because now anyone can see it.
I'm not aware of the impact. I'm really not aware of it because I'm so busy. It was so interesting. Somebody was doing the history of comedy in Santa Cruz, and there's this marvelous stand-up comic named DNA, and he is the reason why Santa Cruz is now a comedy community that is on the map, that people strive to come here and be part of his comedy scene, right? So he's writing this history, and I'm reading it, and there's nothing in there about The Last Laugh at all, nothing. And I wrote my indignant letter about The Last Laugh, and there was sort of a polite exchange, and then we educated ourselves. So when you talk about what impact did this have, I think like anything else, things are born and they happen and then they die. And so you have a different experience of the impact that this has had, but my experience of it is that for the most part, it went away, except for in the lives of people who experienced it.
Do you think that we could do The Last Laugh again today?
What was the question?
Do you think that we could do The Last Laugh again today?
No. there's no urgency. Plus, who would be a PWA?
I would do the last laugh about the recurrence of homophobia, the vicious attacks against people who are getting genderized and marginalized, the children who are getting tortured by this current administration. That to me is the sense of urgency. I would do it again.
Tell me about when you approached the Santa Cruz AIDS Project and Joe Kenny about doing the last laugh.
Oh, that was so scary. That was so scary. They had just moved into a pretty decent building, and I was sitting outside of the building. I remember in my car looking at the building, thinking, how am I going to tell this wild idea to this very serious person dealing with this very serious issue? So I just took a breath, and I remember feeling a little dizzy, and I walked in there. I walked into that place of SCAP, and it looked kind of official and kind of serious, but small. And Joe Kenny appeared kind of serious and small, because she is, right? And I approached her by trying to tell I approached her and I did my best to sort of explain what we were doing and what I was looking for. And I did not get thrown out on the pavement, which was good because I'd been thrown out at other places. And she said she would try. I remember there was some discussion about how are you going to find a PWA, let alone a series of PWAs who've wanted to do comedy? Do you know anybody? So there was this big question about whether or not it would even work. And she supported it. She went along with it. I was so honored by her attitude.
And then from there, she introduced you to Jim?
Yeah, that's how I met Jim. And this is a lifelong friendship, by the way. And he's done theater locally now. I've been in things that he's directed, vice versa. It's a relationship that cannot be explained, the depth of it.
What was it like working with Jim on The Last Laugh?
I tried to be as inconspicuous as I could. He was working with Carrie Snow, and they were in a world of their own. It was very tight. They had their own language. And as I was sort of producing and a little bit of directing, I just saw that it was something that was not to be interrupted. But he had an attitude that was very different back then. He was pretty protective of who he was. He was challenging. He was intimidating, really. And so I just tried my best not to piss him off.
What motivated you personally to take on a project like The Last Laugh?
Self-pity. So here I was at the Comedy Store in the main room, night after night, and all the people around me were becoming stars. And I wasn't becoming a star yet, and that really upset me, right? So I'm in my kitchen in North Hollywood, and I'm on my knees, and I'm crying, and I'm like, why not me? Why not me? And all of a sudden, I started thinking about who is someone who actually has a problem right now? I would think that if I had AIDS and wanted to be a stand-up comic, no, I'm going to start that over.
Go ahead.
I was on my knees in my kitchen, and I was feeling sorry for myself, and I was crying. And I thought to myself, who is somebody who actually has a problem? And of course, it was the people with AIDS. People were disappearing left and right, and there was no explanation, not a good one. So I thought, what do I have? What do I have of myself that could maybe somehow be a part of this solution, or at least contribute in some way? And I thought, what if I helped someone else have this dream come true for them? What if I could make that for someone? Could I make it happen really fast for them? Because it sure ain't happening for me, right? And then I thought, what if there were a lot of people in my circle who cared more deeply about the lives of others than about their own careers. I wonder if they're out there. And sure enough, there were a whole bunch. And there was another issue at stake too. And that was the issue of where AIDS was thought of as being an AIDS disease. There was another issue here, and that was people thought of AIDS as being a homosexual plague back then. And I needed to know that there were people who transcended stupidity, who did not care about that, but who cared more about people's sons and people's daughters and people who were out of time. And would they be generous enough to just, you cannot ignore homophobia, but sometimes there's something very, very important that you have to do, where you have to really focus on the issue at hand. I don't have a minute for homophobia right now. We're busy. We are busy. And that's how I was raised. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a gay man, literally. And I did not know that that's why I was raised the way I was raised. When I grew up in my house, my father owned a company called Art Babbitt Films. And he picked two lesbians who were a couple to be the main directors of this studio. And I remember being a small child and saying, I don't really understand Peggy and Jan, and being told, oh, they're just married. They're just married people. And of course, they didn't have the right to be married. But that's how Peggy and Jan were explained to me. And so I was able to go on my happy way. So homophobia was not something that existed in my house. It wasn't an issue. It was just a non-issue. And then one day I was told a story about a man named Freddie Hirsch. So part of this story is that my mother was Dina Babbitt, an Auschwitz survivor, number 61016. And she had been involved in a Zionist organization called Habonim back in the Czech, well, they call it the Czech Republic. She was in the town of Brno at the time. Great Czech word, very few vowels. And she belonged to this group that was all about going to Israel and creating some safe place for Jews. And I know that's considered very bad nowadays, but you have to think back to like the late 1930s, where there really was no safe place for Jews, and it was getting worse and worse. So a young man named Freddie Hirsch decided that he was going to run this group of Habonim in the little town of Brno. And she joined and fell madly in love with Freddie Hirsch. He was gorgeous, and found out later, well, he's gay, so that's not going to happen. So she makes her way. She ends up in Auschwitz. She gets on the transport and ends up where she gets a message from Freddie Hirsch, of all people. And it was very dangerous to relocate yourself from place to place, but she found her way to the children's barracks because the SS thought it was very funny to put a gay man in charge of children because they thought he would be perverse. And they didn't know that he was a youth group leader, and he was brilliant. And he brought art and he brought theater in there, and he knew that my mother was an art student, and he asked her to do a painting inside of the barrack. So she draws this painting of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was the last movie these Jewish children were allowed to see. And to keep the story short, Dr. Joseph Mengele discovered that there was a painter and someone who could capture the authentic color of skin. And he really wanted to show that brown people were inferior. And he had captured gypsies. And color photography was not a thing back then, so he brought my mother into his experiments, and she was required to paint brown people, the Roma. The slur is to call them gypsies. So she painted the Roma, and she painted slowly so that they could live as long as possible. And when I learned the entirety of this story, that is why I'm alive, is because of a gay man named Freddie Hirsch, who knew that my mother could paint. How could I not use my art for this Holocaust?
How did doing the last laugh change you?
First, I'm going to start with the external change. And one thing that I learned was that I am not at the mercy of anybody to create my art. That if I have something important to say, I can find a way to say it. I can get the funding. I don't have to wait for some high mucky muck to determine that what I have to offer is worth creating. I can create anything I want. I just have to be persistent. So that changed me that way. The other way it changed me was that I learned about my selfishness. I learned that the things that I was consumed with, this ego gratification about what we know as success, the illusion that something external is going to create happiness, that I'm going to wrest something peaceful and fulfilling out of an external occurrence that is granted to me by someone and will garner me a lot of attention, it's false. What actually matters is the way in which we walk each other home.
How do you think Santa Cruz would be different if we hadn't lost the folks from the last laugh?
I think it would have more heart, because the folks from the last laugh went through an experience that made them value others. I think we would have a lot fewer people lying on the streets, being stepped over, that we would not be allowing this pervasive, in a way, prison camp of homelessness, having people rot outside, unhoused, starved. I don't think we would tolerate that.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
This story may come out of nowhere and may not go with what we're talking about here, but I would like to mention that in 1984, I gave birth to a critically ill child, and this child required transfusions. She had a very specific kind of blood. And the only two people that we knew who had this blood, Cedars-Sinai in West Hollywood wanted everyone to find their own blood sources for their babies, because 3 of the babies who needed transfusions ended up with AIDS. So I had to call everyone I knew. And I called my sister, who donated, and I called my brother-in-law, who donated, and he was a gay man. And his blood courses through my daughter's veins to this day.